Hi guys, Emma here, and today I'm going to be talking about Twin Peaks again by picking some random topics out of this box. Okay, so I don't have very many topics left, but I think I'll just get on with it. The Chalfonts and the Tremonds. Do the names relate to human hosts and spirit entities, the Chalfonts being one and the Tremonds the other? So I'm not sure that I've really ever gotten my head around the Chalfont-Tremond thing completely, or actually formed any solid idea about who they are and what their real objective is. I think I've only just managed to guess that and try and come up with conclusions that might fit. I don't know if there's a definite answer. So where do we start actually with this? Mrs. Tremond is also known as Mrs. Chalfont, apparently, and she lived originally, or at least as far back as we know, I think, in the trailer park that Carl Rodd owns, the Fat Trout Trailer Park, with her grandson named Pierre. I don't know if he's ever given that name, but that's kind of what he's called, I think, in the fan community. I can't remember if he's actually called that on screen anywhere, I'm not sure. And then later on, she and Pierre live next door to Harold, and whom Laura services as part of the Meals on Wheels program from the Double R Diner. So when she was living at the trailer park, she was known by the moniker Mrs. Chalfont, and was, at least according to Carl Rodd, the second Chalfont family that lived in that same trailer. And it's the trailer under which Chet Desmond finds Teresa Banks's ring. Mrs. Tremond and the grandson then appear to Laura and give her a picture of the rose room above the convenience store, and Laura hangs that on her wall, has a dream in which she enters that space, sees the grandson. Pierre is also seen hopping around near Leland shortly after he discovers that Laura is present at his illicit kind of rendezvous with Teresa. Later on, Donna meets Mrs. Tremond, and they kind of seem normal to some degree, at least except for the fact that Pierre is performing magic tricks with creamed corn. But when Donna later looks for the family, there's a totally different woman there. A woman who apparently seems like she's just moved there from a sunnier climate in my mind. Then we see the Granny Tremond and Pierre, the grandson, in a meeting above the convenience store where many lodge dwellers are present. So that includes Bob, the little man, the electrician, the jumping man, some woodsmen, and the grandson says fellow victim, I think, and he points and he plays with a mask and his face transforms into a monkey, the same monkey that says Judy. And the other Tremond in the picture is Alice Tremond, who we meet at the end of Twin Peaks: The Return, and where she is living in the Palmer household. And she claims that the prior owners were the Chalfonts. So if I just start with the names, Chalfonts and Tremonds, is there anything in the names for a start? Like, Tremond is, I believe, of French origin. I'm sure that when I was a kid, we used to have these Tricolor books in French classes, and half the characters in them used to be Tremonds. I'm pretty sure of it. It used to be like,
"Où est Madame Tremond? Elle est dans la salle de bain."
Pierre is obviously French. What else is French in Twin Peaks? We have the French woman, we have the French-Canadian sector that are connected to One-Eyed Jacks and the Renault brothers. And so did they just take their name from a geographical region that, you know, they would fit in there with that name, the Tremonds? We've got, did I say the French woman? We've got Gordon Cole's French Dream. We've got Harold's French poem, Suicide Note. I don't know if all this is just because David Lynch likes French things. I don't think Chalfont is French, but it's not used as much as the Tremond moniker. I think, like, the Tremond is the premier identity and the Chalfonts seem to be the secondary identity. The Tremonds are seen and presented, whereas the Chalfonts are kind of heard about, I think. So what about their identities? They appear to be lodge inhabitants because they make an appearance at the meeting. Is Pierre the magician referred to in the Fire Walk With Me poem? Do their ages accurately represent their actual ages? Or are they actually older than they seem or younger than they seem? For instance, Pierre, to me, he dresses like a fully grown man, and he has some authority in that meeting in the convenience store. Definitely seems to, at least. I'm thinking about Chet, actually, and his conversation with Sam in Fire Walk With Me when he's explaining what Lil was trying to portray in her actions. And he says, what's missing? And when I think about the grandson and the grandmother, what's missing? Well, it's the mother and the father. So is that relevant? Because obviously we get to a point in Twin Peaks where a mother figure and potentially the father figure are very important in the overall plot. Is that just a clever maneuver to actually start to get us to think about what's missing in that scenario by presenting us with this old woman and this young boy without the parents being there? And you know, on that path that would later lead us down the Jaude and Bob scenario. Could Red be Pierre grown up? That's a theory that's come up, because with a nickname like that, obviously it could link up to the Red Room. It's also potentially a colour of fire, and it's obviously disguising his real name. So I think that's a potentially good theory, especially since Red conducts the same kind of magic and he's clearly up to no good in the town. So are the Chalfonts actually humans who have been inhabited by the lodge spirits who are actually the Tremonds? I think that's what this question is asking, and I think that's a possibility. As I said, Tremond seems to be the dominant name, while the Chalfonts seems to be the one that's been obfuscated, is that the word? Yeah, obfuscated. They're more referred to and unseen, potentially as if they've been taken or spirited away. So what job are the Tremonds actually performing outside of the lodge anyway? In my opinion, they seem to be lures or helpers who back up Bob, or who may even be directly planning with Bob, or perhaps directing Bob to some degree. You know, Pierre's request, fellow victim, is that a command or just an utter desire? It's hard to tell really, but could be taken as either, and it obviously has very different meanings depending on how you interpret that. Is Bob killing for the thirst of that group, or the hunger of that group I should say, or for himself? When Mrs. Tremond approaches Laura with the pictures, she seems weird but not dangerous. You know, why is there this drawn out plan to kill Laura in the way that she's killed? Is there some hierarchy there that we need to understand? Mrs. Tremond is well dressed. She seems like an innocent old lady, but giving Laura that picture seems to push Laura closer to the moment where she accepts her grisly fate. I think that some fans think that the Chalfonts or the Tremonds are just actually impartial messengers kind of thing, who perhaps guide people this way or that way, but to me, I feel like they're more strongly depicted as being dark in nature, and that their ultimate goal is a negative one. They are usually connected to death. Laura's, Teresa Banks, Harold's, and this might be important when thinking of the final scene in Twin Peaks: The Return, when we have a Tremond there. Did someone die? I do think that they guide people and push people around, but only in the same way that pawns do in a chess game. You know, they intend to take out pieces from the other side through their manoeuvring, their slow and gradual manoeuvring. One theory that I've heard is that Pierre is actually Leland at a younger age, and that potentially Leland was replaced by a tulpa at some point, and the tulpa is whom Bob is actually inhabiting, and that a human was taken to the lodge. I don't know why, but can a tulpa be used in this way? And actually I feel like because of the uses of tulpas already, that's a less likely scenario, just because of the overuse of the tulpa thing. When we see the grandson jumping around next to Leland, what's he actually doing? Is he practicing like spiritual transformation? You know how we see like the owls used as carriers for the lodge spirits? What if the grandson is actually thinking about making that transition into another kind of species? When he jumps up, he's imagining flying or taking to the air. Is the woman who Donna meets later on just another assumed form of Mrs. Tremond? Ultimately, I think that you have to assume that the Chalfont Tremond thing is very, very important, given that it's used in that last scene. And it creates a huge kind of static atmosphere in that final scene with Laura and Coop. I find it extremely creepy, that scene, especially when Alice is talking to that unseen guy, whom we assume is her husband, and at one point he clearly talks for a long time, and after he's done talking, she turns back to Laura and Coop and just says, no. It feels very deceptive, but in a non-violent way. It's like an intellectual bamboozle. No. Although Alice's words suggest that she's trying to be helpful, I just get the feeling that this is the last frontier of evil that Laura and Coop are actually facing. And that on some level that this is the embodiment of the force of evil or negativity, even if that's on an unconscious level. All of the scenes of numb arms and the references, do they represent premonition of death, or are they connected to electricity? That's another thing that I'm not quite sure that I have a handle on, and I always assumed it was connected to the ring. Everybody who wears the ring, right, gets a numb arm. I think I most probably connect it with that scene when they're talking about Teresa Banks and they mention that she has that numb arm, and there's a lot of association with it being connected to the ring then. And I think Laura has the numb arm. So I don't know if the ring is like a conduit for electricity, or once you put the ring on, you start to vanish into the other world sort of thing. You're becoming part of that other world slowly. Not sure. Just kind of plucking guesses from the air here, to be honest. Traditionally, when you have a numb arm, that's a sign of a heart attack. So does the arm also have connections to the heart, and maybe how the heart is represented on an emotional and intellectual level rather than how it is physically? We think of the heart as representing love as well. And maybe if we're thinking about the numb arm, we're starting to think about a numb heart as well. Maybe that's the progression, the removal of love, the numbing of love. Obviously there's a lot of arm stuff. We have the arm that is in the lodge, that is an electric tree, so that's connecting the electricity to the arm. We have the one-armed man. Some of that isn't there in The Secret History with is it the Jack Parsons story? There's also that thing where the hand starts shaking, isn't there, in season 2 when the lodge is about to open. I think that is how it plays out, and I don't know if that's another connection to that as well, whether that has anything to do with the numb arms. I think it could be representative of losing yourself. Maybe the arm is just the first symptom, and as soon as you put the ring on, you're marked and you start to become closer to that world of darkness and evil, closer to losing yourself, closer to losing your life. Yeah, there's a lot of symbolic stuff there that I probably don't fully understand. Just thinking on this, actually, it's curious, isn't it, how so much of the content from Fire Walk with Me was pulled and expanded on in season 3. There's just so much stuff. It's like, yes, the elements of Fire Walk with Me are pretty clear to me. Sometimes, actually, when I'm thinking about that, the elements from Fire Walk with Me are much more distinct to me than anything that was brought up in the first 2 seasons for some reason. I don't know why. And clearly Lynch, because his input was into Fire Walk with Me, he felt that those elements were important to take into the season 3. And yeah, I don't know why I'm bringing that up. I just think it's quite interesting that that a lot of the mythology that we get in season 3 is actually got its roots in Fire Walk With Me, which I'm willing to guess that a lot of people haven't actually seen that. You know, people who watched the first 2 seasons. I wonder if there's anyone who just sort of jumped into watching season 3 without watching the movie, and how they would make sense of season 3 if they hadn't. Just curious. Anyway, let me know what you think of the numb thing in the comments, because I think I need some help understanding it. King Arthur references. To be honest, I was surprised that the King Arthur references continued in season 3, because I thought that in the original they had been a bit clunky and patched in a way to sort of ramp up the weirdness level of Twin Peaks, and that it really wasn't necessary because Twin Peaks was already weird enough without the King Arthur references. But they were memorable, they were really memorable in the original, with the Glastonbury Grove and stuff, and that became iconic. There's actually a Glastonbury Grove near where I live. And last year I went there and I was taking a selfie of myself next to the street sign like a crazy person. So the King Arthur legends are probably well known by a lot of people, most people, even if it's on a basic level. I think it's such an enjoyable and curious story. It's an enchanting one. It's like the fictional version of the Jesus story in a way. I think it has parallels with that in some way, like thinking that King Arthur is going to return the same way that we think there's going to be a second coming of Christ. Or some people think that. And the story is full of hope and the realisation of dreams and the happening of the impossible, which I think fits right into Twin Peaks. And I think that's why it endures to this day, because it has so much allure. So weaving the King Arthur story into fiction is something that many authors have actually done. And actually, I didn't really realise the extent to which this is true until I started looking into it when this show was on. And we were getting these new King Arthur references. And when I started to think about it, I freaked myself out a little bit. Because, weirdly, I'll just get some evidence to prove this. These are my 2 favourite books in life. And it did not occur to me that both are riddled with King Arthur references. Don Quixote and these kids' books, The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper. Very good. There's just so many King Arthur references in the art world, for example, as well, not just in literature. In film world, you know, we actually have King Arthur films and also references to King Arthur when he's not immediately the subject as well. When you start to learn about the King Arthur legend, you can't help but fall deep into it. It's almost like a spell. When I was a kid in middle school, a teacher approached me and she said, "I've been researching your surname. It's so unusual that I wanted to know what it meant." And when I looked into it, I found out there was a Welsh king who actually took over the entirety of the kingdom at the time. And he lived in a castle that is quite close to where I live. And you know, I've been there. I was actually in the house, you know, the school house, which is Bamburgh Castle. It is Bamburgh Castle. He actually reigned there, this king, and you have the same name basically as the king. And what I later found out was this king, who I may be related to, was supposed to be, first of all, an enemy of King Arthur, and then he became an ally of King Arthur. So basically, I kind of freaked myself out. So basically, I may be related to someone who used to hang out with King Arthur. So where did the King Arthur stuff all begin? Well, according to what I've read, there was some Breton and Welsh poems that existed, as well as sort of oral hand-me-down stories of King Arthur, and they persisted for years and years. This was, you know, King Arthur was supposed to be around in the 5th and 6th century. And in 1138, so quite some time later, a man wrote a book called Historia. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. History of the Kings of Britain, I think it was called, but in Latin or something. And it's believed that much of his references to King Arthur were based on that folklore that already existed, while the rest may have been based on his imagination. There are so many characters in the King Arthur world that I can't possibly get into that now. I suggest that you kind of do some reading on the King Arthur stuff because it really is interesting. And you might have heard of some of the major characters like Lancelot and Percival, Merlin, Guinevere, the Fisher King. But what King Arthur references do we get in Twin Peaks? So there are actual references as well as subtle references in season 2 and 3. So we've got like there are 12 Knights of the Round Table, for example, and that's often connected to the sycamore trees and circular entrance to the lodge. There's an Excalibur sign in Las Vegas. There are obviously street names in Las Vegas as well. Lancelot Court. There are references to giants in King Arthur legends, and obviously we get a giant in Twin Peaks. We've got white horses, silver Mustang, casino. So what does it all mean? Possibly most obviously there are comparisons drawn between Coop and King Arthur. You know, Arthur is a hero that's slated to return when he is needed the most, just as Coop returns in The Return. I know that some people think that Coop possibly has links with Lancelot just because Lancelot is known to have had an affair with King Arthur's wife, but I wonder if Wyndham could be actually more in tune with that character, if that's what we're doing, if we're kind of trying to fit the King Arthur characters on top of the Twin Peaks ones, if that's what we're doing. Maybe Wyndham would be more representative of Lancelot because he betrays his friend, so it might be a different kind of betrayal, and basically he betrays society as well by his actions. And Lancelot's skills were supposed to be exemplary. Obviously Wyndham is a super skilled FBI agent. If you had to compare his skills with Coop's, who would come out on top there? I know that some people theorise that the abundance of King Arthur references in season 3 perhaps meant that Coop was still inside the lodge and that he hadn't got out, that this version of Las Vegas that he was living in was just an extended version of the lodge, because it does at times seem to be bordering on the absurd with how ridiculously obvious these references are. So why is it so strongly referenced? Perhaps it links into Frost's origin stories about these mystical beings, the known powers that exist in Twin Peaks. Perhaps the King Arthur story is one of the most obscure and yet long-lasting stories out there, and therefore the most tantalising and the easiest to fit into the Twin Peaks story. I feel like references to King Arthur's castle and how that plays out in King Arthur's legends, you know, the castle is very hard to discover, it kind of vanishes or something, it's never been found, still being looked for apparently, and that kind of is reminiscent of how the lodge entrances are meant to appear and vanish. Is Laura the Holy Grail? Is the story of King Arthur actually being played out in the entirety of Twin Peaks? Is this like the modern reworking of those fables and tales? I'm personally not concerned that the references need to be boiled down into tiny little details though, or solid comparisons made between exact Arthurian characters and Twin Peaks characters, and the locations as well. Despite there being great evidence to do that, I think that it is enough to say that King Arthur is seen as this ultimate force of goodness and glory and positive magic, and that he's aided by this divine force, and that is what links Cooper and the White Lodge to that story. Come to think of it, maybe Coop was always part of the White Lodge inhabitants, or maybe he was connected to them and always set for the fate that he ends up having. Maybe he was always going to be their King Arthur type hero from day one. So yeah, just to finish that one up, I really do recommend learning about the King Arthur stuff. It feels so British actually. for me it feels real, like it's connected to the landscape of Britain as well, in a way that nothing else is. So yeah, maybe that's what kind of threw me when they first mentioned the stuff like Glastonbury Grove, because I felt like that's so detached from what Twin Peaks is, like this northwestern little American town. Why are you bringing in the King Arthur stuff when that's connected to Britain and everything over here? But I do see it now, but just on a personal level, like it does feel like it seeps through the landscape in Britain, and that personal connection that I have feels very real and interesting to me. Yeah. This is actually the last topic that I've got in the box. I may have missed somebody's comment. If I have, you can tell me. YouTube have been messing around with the comments a bit, and it's very difficult to find them. They like show you that you've got comments on your videos, and then when you click on it, it shows you one at a time, and you can't scroll down. There's no scroll bar on the comments bit. It's very weird. You used to be able to see them all on one page and icon. Anyway, was Bob subordinate to the lodge dwellers, or what was his position in the lodge? So if I just go backwards from Bob being destroyed, that seemed to be very indicative that he was an extremely important part and a powerful aspect in the whole characters of evil that existed. You know, he had to be defeated at the end in order to move on. It was like that was the last thing Coop had to do before he managed to find Laura or Carrie Page. And the fact that they needed a modern day superhero to kill Bob feels quite important as well, that they needed that green glove. But before that, we obviously see the doppelganger merging with Bob. Sometimes I feel like the doppelganger doesn't deserve to be called Mr. C, because he doesn't deserve a title of Mr, because he's not a Mr. He's definitely not a Mr. He's just like a jerk. You know what I mean? But anyway, when he's looking in the mirror and he says, you know, Bob appears and says, "I'm still with you," that seems to suggest that Bob is giving a huge amount of power to the doppelganger. And it also seems to suggest that Bob has free will, because if he's saying, "I'm with you now," and he's saying, "That's good," well, just in my mind, I interpret that as Bob saying, "I choose to stay with you," rather than "You're keeping me here with you because you're more powerful than me." So, so in terms of his relationship with the Cooper doppelganger, I would say that Bob is more powerful, and that Bob probably endows Mr. C with super strength, a greater degree of strength anyway, and perhaps the ability to survive fatal attacks, etc. Then we've got like Bob as he is in the convenience store meeting. So he's got a place at the table. So that to me suggests that he is actually very important. Is he at the head of the table, or is it the little man who is conducting events? It's a group meeting, but I do feel like Bob has a lot of presence in that scene, that you can sense his evil coming out still, his rage and his anger and that hunger. He's just generally scary. So I feel like he's definitely, in my eyes, higher than people like the woodsman, the jumping man, the grandmother. As I said before, is Pierre telling Bob something, or is he just uttering his wishes? If he's telling Bob something, then perhaps the magician is higher than Bob. But if the magician was higher than Bob, then that leads into a whole different discussion about, well, would Red be Pierre still? Because that would mean that Red was more powerful than Bob, and that seems unlikely. And if Red wasn't anything to do with the grandson, then still that would mean that this little boy, this form of the little boy, was more lauded than Bob in the Lodge inhabitants. I hope this is making sense. I don't know if this is making sense, but I don't know if that seems likely, since he seems to have the companionship of the grandmother the whole time, as if she's controlling him in some way as well. I would say that it's more likely that Bob is also higher in rank than the grandmother and the grandson as well. Ultimately, I think that there is this connection made that Bob is actually connected to Baal, I don't know how you say that, or Beelzebub, or Satan if you like, and that he is connected to this union with the mother figure, Jaude, and that together that unholy union would give birth to the rise of evil, or something like that. And there's also that relationship with the one-armed man, that very strange union that they have. I do think, considering the fact that Sarah Palmer ends up possessed with this ultimate evil, this mother figure, if you like, then we have to assume that the opposite to that, the counterpart to that, is Bob, and that Bob would be pretty important in that ranking scenario. I mean, you can draw examples, I think, and find some evidence that perhaps Bob may be being manipulated by someone of higher rank in the lodge. I wonder if this is just because Bob's rage and wildness are so difficult to control that perhaps he needs that. He needs to be reined in order to achieve his goals, whereas he may not be capable fully himself of doing it. He may need that team to rein in that violence for a short while until it's time to strike, which sounds horrific. But yeah, tell me what you think in the comments. And as I said, that was the last topic. I don't have any more. I haven't written any more down from the comments. I couldn't see any more. So if you have had one that I haven't put in there, you can let me know in the comments and I'll maybe respond to you if I can, if I'm able. I've really enjoyed doing this series of videos. It's been a good distraction, I think, with all of what's going on at the minute. And I hope that it was kind of a distraction to you as well, and that you've enjoyed discussing it in the comments and basically chilling out with some Twin Peaks. Yeah, I was thinking about maybe doing some just general videos about the stuff that I've watched lately, new, old, television, movie stuff, and yeah. But I really have enjoyed this, and I always enjoy talking about Twin Peaks. Sometimes I find the topics quite difficult because I don't know if there's any answers really to a lot of stuff that people bring up, like fans go over and over, and really I think at the end of the day you can bring ideas to the table, but it's down to the individual to form them into their own image, their own story, their own reality. So that's it really. Thank you very much for watching today. Leave a comment if you want to about anything that I've said today. Do you also have some King Arthur connections? What do you think about the Chalfonts and the Tremonds, the Numb Arms and Bob? So again, thanks for watching and see you later. Bye!